Good evening. Tonight we're behind the bungalow, have a little fire, and I thought I would share some stories with you today. So this is a story about Tajar. These are some Tajar tales. And Tajar is a creature that lives here at camp, and I'd like to share some stories about it. So this is a book that you can probably find in your local library. The author is Jane Shaw Ward. And so let's try to see what Tajar's up to tonight. This is a story about how the Tajar got his tucks. Once upon a time, there was a Tajar. Do you know what a Tajar is? Well, he's something like a tiger, and something like a jaguar, and something like a badger. And if you should see him once, you would forget what he looked like. But if you should see him twice, you would forget what he looked like, and that would be quite fatal. The Tajar lived somewhere near a camp, in a camp, and around a camp, and under a camp, and over camp, and all the places where a camp was, he lived, except when he was staying in his hiding place, which was somewhere between the bottom of a tree and the top of the sky. When the campers were in camp, the Tajar stayed in his hiding place. But when they were away, and when he got bored with his hiding place and was filled with folly, he used to come out and dance in the moonlight. And one beautiful moonlight night, when the campers were still in camp, but the Tajar was exceedingly filled with folly, he came out of his hiding place and danced in the moonlight. And he danced and he danced. And some of the campers saw him once. And the chief camper almost saw him twice. And so almost forgot to forget what he looked like, but not quite. But the range ranger, who ranged the ranges in that region, looked across the ranges and saw the foolish Tajar dancing in the moonlight. And he came across to the camp and he called, "Tajar! Tajar!" And the Tajar answered, "Yes, sir." And the range ranger said, "Tajar, Tajar, didn't you know that you weren't to dance in the moonlight when the campers were in camp, no matter how filled with folly you might be?" And the Tajar just said, "Yes, sir." Very sad. Then the range ranger sat down and he took out a needle and a long thread, and he took a tuck in the Tajar's right front leg, and then he took another tuck in the Tajar's left front leg. But of course, it was magic and it didn't hurt. Then he said, "Now, no matter how filled with folly you may be, you can no longer dance in the moonlight, for the tucks make your legs too short and they won't reach." And the range ranger put the Tajar in his hiding place, and he went away over the ranges, and there was no more dancing for the foolish Tajar that season. Then the campers went to town, and the range ranger, who really wasn't as severe as he seemed, used to put up a ladder thing so that the Tajar could get in and out of his hiding place by himself whenever he wanted to. And whenever the last camper was halfway to the station and just a little bit more, the range ranger would put up the ladder thing and the Tajar could do as he liked. The first time after that the Tajar was filled with folly, he came out of his hiding place and began to dance in the moonlight. First, he tried dancing on his forelegs, the way he used to, but he found that the tucks in his front legs made his dancing uneven, and besides, it made him a little seasick. So he tried dancing on his hind legs, but that made his knees ache. Then he tried dancing on his front legs, but that made him dizzy, and all the folly ran to his head. Then he sat down on the ground and put his head on his knees, and all he needed was a little sympathy to discourage him completely. Presently, the range ranger came along. The Tajar heard him coming and hunched up his shoulders, all the more discouraged. Then the range ranger stood behind him and said, "Tajar, Tajar." And the Tajar said, "Yes, sir," very sad. And the range ranger said, "I'd never be so simple as to have only one way of amusing myself." And the Tajar said, "Yes, sir," very meek, but he was really very indigent inside. And then the range ranger went away, and the Tajar sat up and said to himself, "I'll show that old road ranger that I have lots of ways to amuse myself," which was exactly what the range ranger was expecting he would say. The Tajar tried inventing new ways of amusing himself. He thought and he thought. He thought of several ways, but they weren't good enough. But finally, he thought of a perfect new way, and he said, "I know what I'll do. I'll take death-defying life leaps through the branches." He tried, and the first time He took them with his front feet, but he found that the tucks began to rip and it made him nervous. And then he tried with his hind feet, but he found he couldn't see where he was going, and besides, he needed his hind feet to push off with. At last he said to himself, I know what I'll do. I'll take death-defying life leaps through the branches with my tail. Sure enough, that's what he did. He went swinging through the trees at a great rate, taking death-defying life leaps with his tail, and found it most enjoyable. Presently, he went swinging down near the camp, and he found that that was a splendid place to play. After a while, the range ranger came along and saw the Tajar flying through the branches and said, Tajar, Tajar! And the Tajar said, yes, sir! And the range ranger said, Tajar, are you enjoying yourself? And the range ranger said, yes, sir, very proud. The range ranger said, you take care you don't tear your tail off on some of the nails put in by Kenneth, the tallest camper. And the Tajar said, yes, sir, and the range ranger went away. Then the Tajar said to himself, I wonder where the branches are that Kenneth put the nails in. And he went to find out. And he went swinging more and more around the camp. And he found that a lovely place to swing was from the old dead tree to the frame over the dining room table. He leapt back and forth, but there was a little nail in the frame, and it caught on his tail, and his tail tore a little, but the Tajar pretended not to notice. But the next time, he took an extra long swing, and his tail caught on the nail, and it tore it so badly that it tore all the way through, and a piece of it fell down to the ground on one side of the branch, and the Tajar and the rest of the tail fell down on the other side of the branch. But of course, it was magic, and it didn't hurt. The Tajar landed on the ground very hard, and got up looking very thoughtful. Then the Tajar was much distressed. He picked up the end of his tail and wondered how he could fasten it on. First he tried with safety pins that he found near the camp, but they seemed to tear out. Then he tried with a string, but that was too thin. Then he found some tape, and he wound it round and round his tail, and he tied it with string, and pinned it all with a safety pin, and he found that that stayed very nicely and was quite secure. But nevertheless, after that, he was careful not to swing on the branches where Kenneth, the tallest camper, had put the nails. The end.